So Simon, you're aware of the interview with Erik Nissen-Petersen where he questions the value of sand dams, saying that people should only build subsurface dams. How would you respond?
Well, I mean, Erik's lived in Kenya and been involved in rainwater harvesting for over 40 years, and he's been a massive advocate of subsurface dams, which have a massive use. But in actual fact, they are sand dams. The only difference is that sand dams actually have a barrier above the level of the river, and that's where he has issues with the complications of that, really.
He says that they're too complicated because the spillway has to be raised in stages of 30 to 50 centimetres in order to prevent silting, as that would result in no water.
This is a statement that's made by lots of water engineers. It's not unique in it, but it doesn't reflect our experience at all. Certainly in Kenya, if you look at the way that the rivers flow, even though it may be that a dam doesn't fill up with sand in the first season, it may end up with a crust of silt when the water evaporates. The speed of the water in the next rains actually churns up the riverbed and the silt goes over the top. And we've tested and proven this with one particular dam I know took 4 years to fill up, and we dug down 10 feet and there was no layers of silt within that. So I just don't believe that that's true in a lot of circumstances. The only time it would be true is if you don't protect the sides of the valley so that silty water seeps into the dam, which has got nothing to do with the spillway really, or you're in a dryland place where the flow of the water is quite slow, in which case it would silt up unless you built it in stages. But somewhere like Kenya with very seasonal rain, it's just not true.
But what about the concern that water flowing down the river would erode the foundations and one day the dam will simply wash away?
Well, of course, if you don't, like any dam, it doesn't matter whether it's a sand dam or another dam, if you don't build it right, it'll get washed away. And you know, this is what we would call golden rule number 1 in building a sand dam. You need to make sure that the dam is built down to rock at least 1.5 meters wider than the maximum flood width of the river. So if the river's this high during the really rains, you can see how wide that is, and you make sure that you go down to rock. If you don't, of course, what will happen is that the water will find a way through that gap. Just in the same way that the water going over a dam, if you don't have a platform, or there's an apron as they call it, that stops the water eroding the foundation from the far side, then the dam will fall over. But the point is, that's not a problem with sand dams, that's a problem with not building a dam properly. Follow golden rule number 1, you'll be alright.
And what about the contention that if the spillway is too high, the river will simply change course, leaving the dam standing alone?
Well, again, this is more of a design question than it is a question of whether sand dams are right or wrong. You know, and the second golden rule of design, and we only have 2, is that you need to make sure that the river continues flowing as it did before. So, of course, if you build a spillway too high, i.e. higher than a point further up the river, then the river will divert. Equally, if you don't follow golden rule number 1, the water can go around the dam, and if you don't allow the river to continue as it flowed before, which is golden rule number 2, you make sure that you put spillways so that the river continues in the middle and doesn't find a way round, creating that sort of white elephant that you talked about.
Mr. Nissen-Petersen suggests that subsurface dams are cheaper and supply only a little less water than sand dams. How would you respond to that?
Well, certainly in terms of investment costs, subsurface dams are absolutely cheaper. They cost less money. But to say that they only save a little less water just can't be true. If you imagine a subsurface dam, whether it's built with with soil, or like when we build a sand dam with concrete, the water that's saved is the water that's in that catchment where the rock formation is, and that varies quite a lot. As soon as you start going up, you get an exponential increase in the amount of water saved. And for example, if you go up from 1 metre to 2 metres, you get 4 times more water. So yes, sand dams, subsurface dams are cheaper, but as soon as you start getting to 2 metres and beyond with a sand dam, the cost per litre is much lower on a sand dam.
But don't sand dams cost €40,000 to build?
I don't know where that comes from. I mean, I think if we look at probably the most expensive dam that's been extended 4 times and is 6 metres high, may start to approach that sort of number. But an average sand dam, in terms of materials and labour cost, is more like €7,000 to €10,000, and even the larger dams that we build in the big rivers, you're talking about €15,000 for a dam. You're talking about roughly speaking €10 per person for water for life. So I wouldn't regard that as expensive when you compare it to other solutions like boreholes, etc.
He suggests that 9 out of sand dams simply don't work, so why not just go for subsurface dams?
Yeah, I met Erik last year and he made that statement, said 9 out of 10 sand dams don't work. And when I challenged him, he didn't have any evidence to state that that's true. Now, on the one hand, I think the communities themselves provide the absolute categorical evidence that can't be true. If you look at what Excellent Development has supported communities to build 369 dams, Sasol and Katui have supported people to build over 500, and on average a community's built 3 dams each. There's even communities that have built up to 15 sand dams. Now, how much hard work it is to build a dam. The communities collect all the sand and the stones, and why on earth would a community build a dam that then didn't work and then continue to build 3, 4, 5, 15 more? Because that would be madness. If there's one thing I know about Kenyan farmers, they aren't stupid. And a bit more specifically, obviously the work that the ASDF and UDO and Sasol do in building dams, they do evaluation studies and monitoring of the work that they do, and the results are really clear. In Machakos and Makueni, people spend between 3.5 and 5.5, 6 hours to collect water during a normal time frame, and with a sand dam that drops to between 30 minutes and 90 minutes. And that's what the people tell us. And they also tell us what impact it has on their ability to then set up vegetable nurseries. You've seen them yourself, you've seen the fish farms, you've seen the tree nurseries. They've managed to plant over 850,000 trees as a result of the water that's provided by sand dams during a dry period. So the only way that I can agree with Erik is that there are some organisations that build sand dams incorrectly and don't fulfil the sorts of design points that he's making, and I'm sure that some of those organisations have a 90% failure rate. But if you look at the organisations that have built probably 90% of the sand dams that exist in Kenya, that just isn't true. Sasol say they have a failure rate of about 5%. ASDF and UDO, in our experience, the failure rate is 2%.
As a pioneer of sand dams, do you have any final words?
Yeah, I think just because you're a pioneer of something, that doesn't mean to say that you think that's the only solution. I mean, if you look at river catchments, if they have a sandy sediment, then sand dams are a much better solution higher up that catchment. You get to the lower levels where there's a less varied topography, then subsurface dams are definitely the right solution in that instance, because the cost of having to build very, very wide spillways and wings just wouldn't make sense. Just stick to subsurface and build more of them. In fact, in the very lower catchments, you very often don't even need a subsurface dam. You just have an infiltration gallery, like the work that Barney do in Zimbabwe. And even further down the catchment, whether it's sandy or not, there's a great technology like water spreading weirs, which work in a sort of reverse way to sand dams, in which they encourage the water to spread and sink so that people can increase the food production and fertile areas. So the point is, use a technology that is appropriate to that place, and equally apply that technology so it's appropriate. If you look at what we're doing in India, then we're using sand dams in a different way to complement the rainwater harvesting that the communities already do. So being a pioneer of sand dams, though, as opposed to the other technologies, the reason for that isn't because it's a golden bullet. The reason for that is that sand dams are massively underutilised as a technology, and I firmly believe and know that they have the potential of having an enormous impact on millions and millions of people's lives in dry lands. And that's why we're the pioneers of sand dams.
Simon, thank you.